If you're new in town or just new to this whole podcast thing, you're tuning in to LARP by Night, the podcast that discusses all things vampiric with no fear of breaching the Masquerade. In this episode, I will be reviewing the Mind's Eye Theatre Vampire the Masquerade core book, the official LARP Vampire the Masquerade book. In addition, I shall also be discussing my experiences with Vampire LARP. I have been really obsessed with the lore, books and mechanics of Vampire the Masquerade for less than a year at the time of recording, which would eventually result in the conception of this podcast. To my greatest surprise and delight, it has been rather successful in what I intended it to do, receiving much praise and support from the Vampire the Masquerade community, dubbed the Family, and various developers for the Vampire the Masquerade games, such as some of the dedicated Onyx Path publishing writers, the occasional folk from Hardsuit Labs, the developers behind Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 2, and of course, the lovely people at By Night Studios. For those who don't know, By Night Studios are the developers behind official World of Darkness LARP products, LARP of course standing for live action roleplay, which is a little bit different from your standard tabletop game affair. All of the games within the World of Darkness encourage players to embrace the role of their character, with each stat being an extension of the character, rather than just numbers on a page. What makes LARP different is the absence of dice, the introduction of elaborate yet authentic costumes, and large spaces for players and storytellers, the in-game term for games or dungeons masters, to act and portray their character, as if they are all performing a large improvised play. I am remotely familiar with LARP, but only through the World of Darkness documentary on Amazon Prime. Vampire the Masquerade has been very influential in a lot of things, including the inception of LARP, so I was naturally a little bit curious about the different take on Vampire the Masquerade that LARP provided. It is clearly very popular, as there are lots of Vampire LARP vlogs, highlight reels and trailers for various Vampire LARP conventions on YouTube, even if very little of them gives the listener a taste of what Vampire the Masquerade is all about. This of course is fine, as you don't need to snort every conceivable notion of lore through your nostrils like I do to be able to enjoy these games. It was nice to see that the mindset also carried over to LARP World of Darkness games. Amongst one's research, both LARP and podcast related, I would receive a message from By Night Studios at the beginning of 2020. They had been monitoring my then recent endeavours with the podcast and spoke of wanting to form a good relationship with influencers such as myself, knowing and appreciating the positive reception my podcast had been receiving. This led to a conversation on Zoom with the community manager and president at By Night Studios, where we discussed our aims regarding the Family and the LARP by Night podcast. As part of my plan to review every Vampire the Masquerade book I got my hands on, they very kindly offered me the limited and very expensive deluxe edition of their Mind's Eye Theatre Vampire the Masquerade book, otherwise known as the Tim Bradstreet edition, to look at. I would receive my copy on the 22nd of March 2020, reading it many times over so I can give you my honest opinion of the book. And before I start getting unpleasant, spiteful and jealous comments and messages regarding my relationship with By Night Studios, I do not get paid by anyone to do these podcasts, so I have no real incentive other than my own incentive of enjoying myself and delivering honest reviews to you. Furthermore, I would not bother reviewing this book, or at the least willing to receive it, if I did not think there was some good to be found within its pages that would benefit the LARP by Night podcast and by extension, the lovely listeners at home. Or should I say havens? Anyway, as this is the first book review on the podcast, I shall establish my rules on how the LARP by Night book reviews are going to work and reiterate them in every review thereafter. I will explore snippets of the lore, mechanics and rules found within this tome. I will look as to how they are presented and easily they are conveyed to new and old players alike. Finally, as this is a review written and presented by yours truly, the LARP by Night podcast guy, all thoughts and opinions are my own, so if you disagree with something I have said, that is totally fine. It does not mean, however, that you are right and I am wrong, and vice versa. But before I talk about its contents, I feel I should describe the difference between the standard edition of the book and the Tim Bradstreet Deluxe edition that sits nicely on my lap as I write and perform this review. There is only one difference, and that is the artwork. All of the artwork, which are mostly photographs to be honest, are done by Tim Bradstreet, the famous comic book artist that defined the modern realistic approach of the vampires in the original Vampire the Masquerade book. The photos and art found in the standard edition version of the book are done by James Vu and Tom Vieister. I really hope I pronounced your names correctly there. There are no gameplay mechanics and lore differences in either book, which I can say with confidence, for I have a PDF copy of the standard book. The photos found in the Deluxe edition wins, assuming that there was a competition to begin with. The photos found in the Tim Bradstreet book are the famous V20 clan photos that I've seen many times before, but never with quality as fantastic as this on such glossy paper. There are loads of new ones of the various bloodlines which are just as fantastic. The photo done to represent the Daughters of Cacophony is a personal favourite of mine, as is the photo of Christoph Romuald, which of course you know if you have played Vampire the Masquerade Redemption. I was also fond to see Alexander Ward, famous within the family as Jasper Hartwood, the Nosferatu in the ongoing Vampire the Masquerade web series LA by Night, as a Nagaraja. A very fitting clan choice for him. This makes sense if you are familiar with Alexander's work as an actor who specialises as monsters. Mild fangirling aside, that is not to say that the standard book doesn't have great photos. My favourite photo from both of these books is the portrait of Jeanette and Therese Vorman, the famous Malkavians from Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines, who also appear in LA by Night. But comparing the great photos found in each book is just like comparing silk and satin. Both are luxurious and excellently crafted, but one is subtly better than the other. The Deluxe edition is a firm hardback book, black as the Ace of Spades, with the book's title a shiny silver, in addition to a shiny masquerade mask on the bottom right corner of the book, and an old Camarilla Ankh on the back cover of the book. That is not in the centre of the back cover, but it is on the centre should you open the book, something that you could only ever see if you were an idiot casually flapping the book about to make sense of the atrocity like me, or own a glass coffee table and crawl underneath it to view said centeredness. The book also has not one, but 3 ribbon bookmarks, 1 red and 2 black. Now when I received mine, the red one was wedged in the character creation summary pages, 1 black bookmark was in the EXP chart, and another was on the V20 Nosferatu picture. Now, whilst this all may be coincidence, I really hope someone at By Night Studios put them as they were, as they know, as many of the listeners of the Lore by Night podcast know, that Clan Nosferatu is my favourite clan. It is a shame, however, that the bookmarks did not last very long, for they managed to remove themselves from the book 8 days after receiving the book, which could also be a reflection of how frequently I was flicking through the pages of this beautiful book. That isn't my only criticism regarding the quality of the book. I can see a large amount of the book's glue on pages 320 and 321, which makes me worry a little bit about when all of that becomes more serious. Time will tell, I suppose. So let us open the book at long last and see what else is inside. The first chapter offers an insightful overview of what is the world of darkness, alongside the term Gothic punk, the amalgamations of cultures that contributed to the style of VTM. It is written clearly how vampires are not inherent savage monsters, but troubled souls trying their best to come to terms with their new condition, and how to play as this interpretation of a sign of the night. It is in this chapter where a lot of the safety rules are addressed, such as no touching, no weapons, etc., and these are enforced alongside a lexicon, a dictionary of in-game terms that is helpful to anyone new to Vampire the Masquerade. Even for someone who is well versed in the world of darkness such as myself, I don't tire reading these bits because of the engaging way that they are written. The writing here, as with everywhere else in the book, is not just rules and statistics, but every section is just oozing with lore and metaplot that the player can take as much or as little as they want to enhance their stories and characters. The second chapter expands upon the lore planted within the preceding one. It is very much my favourite chapter in the whole book, for it is the only chapter in any VTM book that I am aware of that has a summary of almost every significant event to have ever taken place in Vampire the Masquerade. What some may fail to appreciate for one reason or another is that Vampire the Masquerade is almost 30 years old at the time of recording and has had many books, graphic novels, comic books, collectible card games and video games, none of which have been very consistent with each other in terms of lore for a whole battalion of reasons. So for By Night Studios to have a collection of practically everything that has ever happened is worthy of applause. By Night Studios have also added in some of their own lore, such as the alliance between the 2 large independent clans, Clan Giovanni and the followers of Set, otherwise known as Clan Setite or the Ministry if you're keeping up to modern lore. It is an interesting relationship that I encourage you all to read about in your own time. Spread across almost 20 pages is everything you'll ever need to know to confidently play or storytell any session of Vampire the Masquerade, which is a statement I do not write and say lightly. Like any other Vampire the Masquerade book, the By Night Studios book has what I would consider the basics, such as the main 3 sects that rule the modern knights, the Camarilla, the Anarch movement and the Bart, and how they all differ from each other and why they hate each other. But the By Night Studios book also includes more obscure knowledge, such as the Promise of 1528 and the Week of Nightmares, which aren't particularly needed for most sessions, but little tidbits like that are by no means a bad thing, for they are new for VMT lore junkies like myself to learn, and I learned a lot through this book. I almost wish I got this book sooner and incorporated some of it into previous clan lore podcast episodes, which you should go ahead and listen to if you haven't listened to already. Ha 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 ha. Now, I say almost, for the one fault with this section is not so much the writing of the book, but the existence of the latest version of Vampire the Masquerade, which, at the time of recording, is the 5th edition, which does undermine some aspects of the lore in the Mind's Eye Theatre book, such as the aforementioned alliance between the Giovannis and Setites. It is by no means a game breaker, but it is worth mentioning nonetheless, for some storytellers may wish to incorporate the most recent lore and settings in their LARP games, not mentioned in the Mind's Eye Theatre book, and I can just hear the arguments taking place between storytellers and players right now as I'm recording this. No, sorry, that is my neighbours having another domestic. Anyway, we're getting sidetracked here. Chapter 2 is also where all the vampire clans and bloodlines are properly introduced, which is important for your characters who will be one of these breeds of vampires. Those who are regulars to the Vampire the Masquerade world know exactly what to expect. 13 clans, roughly 9 rarer clans called bloodlines, each one with a trio of blood-based powers called disciplines, each clan or bloodline with a specific weakness, so no one clan is inherently better than the other, and I am very happy to see practically every one of them here, including some new ones found only in this book. What I didn't expect was that each clan has their own exclusive merits that the player can purchase at character creation, which I have mixed feelings about. Most of them are very cool, such as the Nosferatu's Pliable Blood, which gives them an additional 4th discipline, which costs 3 of the 7 merit points you have at character creation, or the Gargoyle's Flight merit, which gives them workable wings for 1 merit point. Now, these things make perfect sense for me to have to be able to purchase, for they are essentially upgrades to the standard clan infrastructure. What I feel a little bit negative about is how the clan variants, such as the many gangrel offshoots and the rarer bloodlines, require you to spend merit points to actually play as them, which is almost like playing a modern fighting game like Tekken or Dead or Alive that requires you to pay a small fee to play as your favourite character. Granted, the issue I've just addressed within Mind's Eye Theatre Vampire would happen so infrequently that it's not really an issue and the game does not feel out of balance because of it. Lore-wise, the many gangrel offshoots I've just mentioned are technically extinct, so there is little reason as to have a lot of them in a modern setting game, for example, without some creative thinking. Those who are new to Mind's Eye Theatre Vampire such as myself may overlook this, but I did want to mention this point anyway, for this may be a potential deal breaker for some people. On a related tangent, chapters 3 and 4 are all about character creation. Chapter 3 is all about how you make your vampiric characters, whilst Chapter 4 documents every single discipline power that belongs to every clan and bloodline in the book. I shan't go too in depth about how to make a Mind's Eye Theatre Vampire here, for I already did that in the previous podcast episode. Those who are familiar with other World of Darkness games will notice a change in how one assembles a character, one that doesn't feel at all jarring, but a difference feels more streamlined to me, and that is even before looking at the character creation summary found on pages 84 and 85. One of the changes I love is how the archetype system replaces the previous natures and demeanours, which I always thought was too on the nose and potentially confusing for newer players, simply by how many of them there are. The archetypes presented here are effectively streamlining the systems of old, making it far more comfortable to remember as you play, making it easier for players to mould the characters' personalities however they please. Some interesting changes have also been made to generation, which is how close your vampiric blood is to the mythic progenitor Cain. Players have to put at least 1 point in a generation if they want to begin playing as a vampire, which I initially found rather odd, until reading that Generation 11, the preferred starting generation in most settings, are considered as neonates, who are vampires who have been vampires for not very long, usually no more than 20 years. In previous and future versions of Vampire the Masquerade, Generation 11 are called ancillary vampires, who have been around for no more than 100 years. Again, it is one of those small changes that doesn't ruin anything, but it is significant enough to make players realise that they are forces to be reckoned with, which is reflected within the points assigned to them at character creation, which I thought was subtly clever. Similarly, there are 3 types of Elder Vampire, which are vampires who have lived for hundreds of years and thus are much stronger than other vampire types. They are Pretender, Master and Luminary Elder, each one having more powers at their disposal. What I am very fond with these types of elders is that each one offers different weaknesses unique to them, which has the effect of how difficult it is for them to obtain their powers, making no elder type inherently better than the other. It would be very easy for players to create monstrous characters who would intentionally drain stronger vampires to gain their powers, a process called diablerie, or have players just start playing as elders so they could have these additional powers and thus cheese the game in their favour, so these very simple weaknesses make players think twice about doing this. That being said, if players do want to start playing their game as an ancillary or elder vampire who are stronger than the default neonates, the book doesn't really offer a system that will offer players more than the starting 30 points to assign your character to the merits and flaws found in Chapter 5, and the skill points so your character sheet can better reflect the character you're portraying. The Disciplines chapter, for the most part, is clear and concise to read and understand, as each power level is accented by a bold title. Something I struggled with is actually finding the disciplines themselves, like the titles for such not being as bold as their powers. It is only with my knowledge of the disciplines prior to reading this book that I am able to locate each discipline, so this interesting choice of font face may add a barrier to newer players that could easily have been avoided. Just under halfway through the book is Chapter 6, which is the core systems, effectively the rules and how challenges are won, which are done mostly by a game of rock, paper and scissors, which I personally find hilarious. There is nothing wrong with it, I just find it a tad jarring to find there is a game out there that is solved with this method. Chapter 7 identifies some of the vampire mechanics, debunking myths and folklores and other gameplay systems such as vampire status within the sects, which are interesting things that are often ignored in other core books, but left to additional source books to introduce and expand upon. Chapter 7 also has some gestures and hand symbols players should use when they are playing to show that they are using certain abilities or they can't be seen, for example. Many of these symbols and gestures derive from American Sign Language. Whereas the Deluxe edition in my possession uses photographs to illustrate these gestures and hand symbols, the PDF copy replaces these pictures with these really fucking ugly black and white drawings that really undermines a lot of the care taken with these fantastic photos. I personally feel that they're not so easy to replicate as well when compared to the photographs in the Tim Bradstreet edition. Now, whether these drawings are found in the physical standard edition of the book, I cannot say, for I do not own it. Personally, I would have swapped chapters 6 and 7 around so you would have dramatic systems, core systems, then storytelling, which is chapter 8 in succession of the other. I would have also moved chapters 12 and 13 further up the book, which are influences and equipment and ally and antagonist respectively closer. That way, all of the gameplay mechanic stuff are closer together. I wish to end this fairly lengthy book review by giving you a general overview of the final 3 chapters I wish to mention, which are chapters 9 to 11, as they sum up a lot of what I love about this book. Each of these 3 chapters dedicates to expanding the lore and the settings for the Camarilla, Sabbat and the Anak movement respectively. Similarly to Chapter 2, there are countless pages of in-depth and insightful lore. A lot of it I was aware before obtaining this book, whilst a lot of it I was not aware of at all of which was expanding one's knowledge. All main Vampire the Masquerade core books have enough information for anybody to pick up and have a basic understanding of how everything within Vampire the Masquerade works, as you would expect with any core book. But this book here, this Mind's Eye Theatre Vampire the Masquerade book, goes beyond anything I had expected it to. There are even sections in this book about requiring places and other players to run your games, and actually how to set up funds for it. There is so much useful information found in this book regarding vampire lore and setting that you can easily never have to worry about buying source books for any other version of Vampire the Masquerade. Granted, it does have some lore stuff missing, such as the Inquisition and the Black Hand, but they can be added in as need be. The book even has a helpful section about how to properly organise the means of acquiring a location for your games of Vampire LARP in any setting and time period. if you're a fan of Vampire the Masquerade lore and games, or you just want to give Vampire LARP a go, I really recommend you buy this book. Maybe not the deluxe edition, because I would admit that is rather fucking expensive, but perhaps the standard edition of the book. And if you're unsure whether it is for you, perhaps buy the PDF copy first, then upgrade to the standard or deluxe editions to further support these wonderful writers and developers. It is wonderfully written, with each sentence oozing lore and context so that no clan seems boring and disciplines are more than just dots on your character sheet. Everything is explained clearly and thoroughly so anyone can enjoy this take on the world of darkness, whether you are a Vampire the Masquerade veteran or a vampiric noob and just like playing dress up in LARP. Now, if you listened to my reviews on Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines and Vampire the Masquerade Redemption, you know that I'm not a Myra out of 10 scores or similar. One man's 9 out of 10 is another man's 2 out of 5 stars, which is another minus 42 out of 100 and so on and so forth. So, I will rate this book Mortis Path out of 10, as that is just as helpful as a proper out of 10 score. To be kept updated, follow the Lore by Night VTM Twitter and Instagram pages to find out when we will upload each episode. You can also find out by subscribing to the YouTube channel and clicking on the little bell, as you will be immediately notified when the latest episode is live. Until next time, farewell.